Hi everybody, welcome to a special evening edition of IndyCar. Now normally I don't do evening editions, as you know, unless I'm feeling particularly creative or something's cropped up during the day that I haven't had a chance to report on, but I found myself unusually unemployed this evening since for some reason the Scotland at 7 studios are closed. I don't know what's going on, so something must have happened. Anyway, not been able to get hold of anyone this evening to find out why we're off the air, but I thought since I was out anyway, I might as well do some kind of show to fill the gap this evening. So here we are with a sort of Scotland at 7:30-ish on IndyCar instead. And now tonight's programme looks at several stories that have appeared in newspapers and in the press across the UK today that I find particularly interesting and perhaps have not really made it to the headlines in the mainstream media. Now, the first one is an interesting one. You'll probably have heard of the Wood Group. This is the company based in Aberdeen, owned by Sir Ian Wood, an engineering firm which deals mostly with oil industry infrastructure. Sir Ian Wood's well known to be a pro-UK type of guy. He likes being in the UK. He doesn't really hold with independence. However, his shall we say his loyalty to the UK government has paid off big time today when they discovered that Wood Group has been successful in tendering for contracts for Sellafield. Now, those of you who know the name Sellafield probably associate it with nuclear power, and you're right, because at the end of World War II, Sellafield originally had been, or Windscale it was known at the time, was originally a munitions factory. It was making ammunition and weapons. And it then became the centre of the experimental nuclear energy programme that the UK started. Now, because Sellafield, as it's now known, is the oldest site in the United Kingdom in terms of atomic energy, it is also the largest nuclear installation in Western Europe. It's huge, right? Two square kilometres. It covers thousands of buildings and hundreds of workers. So it's a big site. And what it is doing at the moment, since the nuclear age is drawing to a close, Sellafield is now the entire centre for the clean-up of the nuclear mess that's been left over by the industry. So it's in charge of reprocessing spent fuel rods, storing radioactive waste, so on and so forth, figuring out how to dismantle and decommission the nuclear industry. Now, the wonderful thing about Sir Ian Wood's contract, for him anyway, and for his company, is that it will take about 100 years to decommission Sellafield. Yeah, you heard that right, 100 years. And Sir Ian Wood's company and a number of others, including one or two construction companies and specialist engineering firms in the UK, have all won contracts from the government to provide services in a rolling programme of major infrastructure investment. Now, major infrastructure investment usually means big building construction contracts, disposal sites, new cooling ponds, that sort of thing. So it's very big money. And Sir Ian Wood must have thought all his birthdays had come at once, because he's got 100 years of public contracts to look forward to. My God, what a money spinner that must be. So I was joking that Sir Ian Wood must be planning to live past till he's over 200 years old to try and enjoy the wealth that he's going to acquire from this. Now, okay, maybe Sir Ian Wood's not the guy who's going to enjoy all the wealth, but the Wood Group certainly has hit the mother lode with this one. What we don't know, really, as normal citizens in the UK, is just how much of our money is now going to be spent clearing up the god-awful radioactive filth that was left over from the last 60 or 70 years of nuclear experimentation and power generation. It has generated a lot of power over decades, and there's no question about that. It has been good in that respect. But nobody, and I mean nobody, gave a rat's ass just where that radioactive waste was going to end up after they'd finished. In such a big rush to produce this energy using this wonderful new technology, nobody really cared what radioactive muck was left over at the end of it and how they were going to dispose of it. And we still don't know how we're going to dispose of it. And we've still got 6 or 7 nuclear submarine hulks rusting in the Forth at the moment that have still to be cut up, encased in lead or concrete or something and buried somewhere, nobody knows where, because nobody will agree to having stuff buried anywhere near them. So the whole nuclear industry is a pariah. But there goes Sir Wood. He has basically fallen headfirst into a septic tank and come up with, you know, a bar of gold in his mouth. How does he do it? Because he's well connected with the British establishment, presumably. It's part of a PPP project, that's a public-private partnership. Now you might remember that phrase from when the Labour Party were doing things like that with their schools, where public sector money, in other words taxpayers' money, is given to private companies to provide services to the public sector. And we all know how that has left Scotland impoverished by billions of pounds that we now have to pay back over these new schools that have been built and leased back to us by these companies. So again, the nuclear power industry's filth has been stitched up into a massive century-long industry for various British companies. And not only will the nuclear filth be one of the industries of the future, but also the filth from the oil industry. The capping of wells, the cutting up and dismantling of hundreds of oil rigs and infrastructure and platforms and jackets, millions of tons of steel to be hacked up into pieces and presumably smelted back down, turned into razor blades or something else. But all I'm saying is that we used to say where there's muck there's brass, where there's radioactivity and oil slicks there is also money to be made. And the clean-up of the last century's crap is going to become a major industry in the United Kingdom, and incidentally a lot of it is going to be done in Scotland because a lot of the expertise exists here. Is this good news? Well, kind of, because it means they're going to clean up the filth. Is it good news for the North Sea? Yes, it is, because it means that these oil rigs are going to be taken out of the North Sea. Some of them, I think, could possibly be repurposed as large platforms for giant wind turbines, or maybe multiple wind turbines and tidal turbines, if these things are placed somewhere far offshore out of sight where people aren't going to mind the view of them. But there is a lot of it, a lot of steel, a lot of scrap metal to be cut up and reprocessed. It will produce thousands of jobs probably for the next 100 years. But in the meantime, while we're cleaning up the UK's filth, a report came out today by the World Wildlife Fund which shows that in Europe, and including us in this by the way, but in Europe at the moment, all of the countries of Europe are living way beyond their means in terms of their environmental footprint. One case or European country, I think it was, what's the smallest one? Luxembourg, right? Very tiny country. Luxembourg has the worst carbon footprint of any country in the world apparently, because within about 46 days of a year starting, Luxembourg has used up all of the renewable resources that would normally be expected to be used by a country that small in 46 days. Therefore, the whole rest of the year, it is using up resources that can't be replaced. In other words, it's living beyond its means. There is a deficit of renewable resources. And this is a new way of thinking about not pollution necessarily, but everything, about the whole environment and the impact that we have upon it. And it was interesting to me, at least as a campaigner, to hear the World Wildlife Fund cast the net a lot farther afield. So the whole of Europe was pulled in this net and shown up to be basically consuming far too much stuff. We are making too many things. We are wasting too many raw materials. We are having to dig up too much metal from the earth, process it, make it into stuff that we then toss away again, and the waste is phenomenal. The amount of energy we're using up in this activity is gigantic, and for no purpose other than to have stuff and throw it away again. So again, it comes back to this examining ourselves and the way we live at the moment and asking the question, is there not a better way to do this? the resources that Luxembourg use in a single year would be enough probably to give the same standard of living to 5 developing countries. So if every country in the world, if every person in the world had the standard of living that we have at the moment, exactly the same standard of living that we've got just now, that we enjoy, then we would need at least 2 Earths, 2 planets, to supply enough raw materials and energy to maintain that standard of living for everybody on the planet. So it's obvious, and it's obvious to anybody with a little bit of arithmetic in their minds, that if you're using 2 Earths worth of resources to maintain a set standard of living, then the only way that the planet and we can survive is if we drop our standard of living by 50% and share out the rest of the resources with the rest of the planet. Now this is something that needs to be looked at. This is a way of imagining how the world can be made fairer, and how the people at the moment who are starving to death could have a reasonable standard of living approaching the one we have now, if only we would scale back on the wasteful consumption that we're currently engaged in. Now I'm talking about a simple thing like this cup of coffee I'm drinking here at the moment, right? It costs about £1.50. The cup gets thrown away, the lid gets thrown away. This cup is actually made of paper and it will be recycled. The lid is made of styrene, it can be recycled as well. So I know at least these things are being recycled. I know that McDonald's, who supplied this coffee, other stores are available, that McDonald's do recycle all their stuff. That's why they segregate their waste, and they also recycle their cooking oil. Although I'm not a big fan of the food at McDonald's, their coffee's very nice. And as I say, other restaurants and other coffee brands are available, but the point is that they're trying. If other companies took the same care that McDonald's are doing in recycling all of their packaging, then we could reduce the plastic and the cardboard waste from even things like fast food and instant coffee, you know, where you take it to go. Some people say you should just have a cup with you that you fill up with coffee, you know, a permanent cup. That's fine as well. But these little changes are not enough. Nope, we need to change things much more radically than that. We would need to scale back the amount of discretionary purchasing that we do. If you think of all the things that you buy in a year that you really don't need, like extra pairs of shoes that you don't really need, or that fancy t-shirt that you fancied having it, but you know, you didn't really need it. Or, you know, a new washing machine, even though your current washing machine still works. Or a new sofa, even though your existing sofa is still fine. All of these things are unnecessarily wasteful. And so we need to start thinking about much longer lifespans for the products that we make, and choosing things that we know we can live with for a long time, and that will also serve us well for a long period of time. Like a sofa that might last 20 years, for example. A car that will last 25 years. Now, they already exist. They're called Volvos, and they've been in business for years, but Volvos are terribly expensive. But these are the kinds of things that we're going to have to do if we're to survive. And Scotland, as I've mentioned many times before, is the centre of innovation in Western Europe. It has been for centuries, and I think it could be again. Okay, so I'm taking a very environmental tack tonight, but forgive me my indulgence tonight. The last story tonight is a political one, and it comes from an article in the Independent, if I remember correctly, and it's a very funny article. And it's about the meeting of the American Foreign Secretary, Mike Pompeo, with Jeremy Hunt, who's our Foreign Secretary, in case you didn't realise. And the two men, you know, standing at podia, or podiums, I can never remember which is the plural, but they're standing at these two podiums, pretending to be best buddies and talking about the so-called special relationship. When Mike Pompeo was asked if the UK's announcement of its inclusion of the Chinese company Huawei in its 5G network would affect in any way the transfer of security information between them, or would it pose any problem to security between Britain and America, his reply was that he said he thought that the UK would never do something that would jeopardise the special relationship. In other words, yes, it was going to be a problem. And then they said, well, will it compromise security? Will it prevent the transfer of information about terrorists or threats or whatever between the security services? And again, he was saying that basically, yeah, it would. And the tone of the article was such that the author or the writer of this article was basically making the observation that unlike previous American foreign secretaries, Pompeo didn't try to dress this up in a lot of diplomatic doublespeak and pretendy bonhomie. He was basically quite straightforward about it. If Britain decides to go with Huawei as part of its 5G network, the Americans just will not share their intelligence with us because they don't want their intelligence network being infected by anything that comes through ours. So there is a definite problem. And also the article was saying that unlike, I don't know if you remember this, but in 2017, Barack Obama said that, was it 2017? Anyway, Barack Obama, when he was president, said that if the United Kingdom voted for Brexit, that must have been before that, it must have been 2015, I think. But anyway, Barack Obama said if we voted for Brexit, that we would have to go to the back of the line if we wanted a trade deal with America. Well, it's got to the point now where the writer is basically saying we're not even going to the back of the queue. We're actually more like a tramp who's going to go round the back of the building and wait for the bins to be emptied, because that's the kind of trade deal, the only kind of trade deal that the Americans are likely to give us, because the special arrangement is a one-way street. And the British government is uniquely weak at the moment, and America recognises that, and Pompeo was on it straight away. He knows that the British government is a lame duck at the moment, and he knows that Brexit is deeply unpopular. He knows that the government is divided and crumbling. So he could pretty much demand anything he wanted from the British government as part of the so-called special relationship. And that special relationship is no longer special, it's very one-sided. The special relationship will be, well, the price of our special relationship to the UK will be that we must get a cut of your National Health Service. We want to get our private health companies in there. We already know that the British government has been sending fact-finding groups of MPs, of Tory MPs and ministers, to a health care and health insurance company in California, which specialises in providing health services to clinical commissioning groups. Now, these are the groups of GPs that they have in England who buy services from outside companies to provide those services to their patients. So they might buy in physiotherapy services, or they might buy in something else, some other kind of testing or laboratory procedures from some other company. But what the Americans want, and what this company in California wanted, was for these commissioning groups to buy all their services from this American firm who would tender for the contracts and would provide these services. It is the start of the American privatisation of the NHS, in England anyway. But if it went ahead, and I mentioned this in a previous programme, if it does go ahead in England and they do begin to privatise the English NHS in this way, then the spending on the NHS that's being done down there will be less, because they will see that more people will be having to pay for these services. At the time, it will be doctors paying for these services, and they'll get their money through taxation. And if that's the case, then what will happen is taxes in England will have to skyrocket to pay the profits of these American companies. Because if the privatisation works the way it sounds like it's going to work, the taxpayer will foot the bill for the profits of American companies coming in to provide services to the NHS in England. The other option is that these American companies take over the health service and buy it out, and buy all the hospitals and everything else, and everybody has to have insurance. And if that's the case, then spending on the NHS in Scotland would drop to virtually zero, because although we have our own ring-fenced, self-organised Scottish NHS, all the money that we get that funds it comes through the Barnett formula with England, and that means if England spends less per head on their health service, then we get less per head in our health service as well. And it's another very good argument for why we need to separate ourselves from England before Brexit happens and before any trade deals are done with the Americans. Otherwise, our health service will end up bereft of funds. It will have no funding left because the Tories are planning the gradual piece-by-piece dismantling of the NHS system and the sale of it to their buddies in America. Remember that Tories will probably have directorships on a lot of different companies, and including, I would be certain that these American firms will offer directorships to British MPs or English MPs and ministers as well as the cost of this privatisation. So that's about it for this evening. Hope you've enjoyed this evening broadcast. Gives me a chance to talk about other things as well that probably wouldn't have time for during the day. But it's important, I think, these three items, that Scotland is going to be part of the 100-year clean-up of the nuclear industry, and also about 100-year clean-up of the oil industry as well. And think about the mess that was discovered in the River Forth. Just today, it's in the papers, that the River Forth is full of these little plastic nodules, whatever they're called, these tiny little plastic pellets that have spilled by the millions from the Grangemouth chemical plant and plastics factories there into the River Forth, and have become part of the sand and part of the sediments in the river. These are the kinds of mess that need to be cleaned up. These are the messes of the 20th century that we in the 21st century are going to have to mop up, clean up and dispose of, so that we can have the clean future that we actually need. And the World Wildlife Fund has just shown us just how far beyond the planet's means we are all living at the moment. We are going to have to live and do a lot more with a lot less, and we're going to have to share what's left with a lot of other people who have nothing at the moment. And the only way this can work is if eventually the capitalist system is dismantled and something new is put in its place. I'm not suggesting what that something new should be, but it's going to have to happen. We are looking at a vast paradigm shift in the entire global economy and the way human beings interact with the planet. Otherwise, we will not last another century. Our entire civilizations will be flooded. It will be a biblical style flood, but we will have brought it on ourselves. You know, God will not have been involved in this particular flood. We are pretty much making it by ourselves. And the Americans, well, at the moment, despite the fact that I really don't like Donald Trump and I don't like Mike Pompeo and I don't like their policies, the one thing you can always say about them is you know exactly where you stand with them, because they don't wrap it up in a bow and pretend that it's something else. The Americans have elected a president who I completely dislike and whose policies I completely abhor. But the one thing I can admire about him and Pompeo and the rest of his team is they are at least honest enough to admit that they don't give a shit about the environment and that they don't give a toss about the special arrangement, and they're quite happy to push the British government around to get their own way. So they are at least honest about it, and we know where we stand with them. I just wish the same could be said for parties south of the border in England who just seem to think that lying is okay. People are fed up with that. Okay, that's about it for this evening. I hope you've enjoyed this experimental broadcast tonight, and if I end up having to do it again, I'll let you know. But I hope that Scotland at 7 will be back on the air soon. I'm sure that whatever's happened this evening must have been something unforeseen, because I know that Linda and the team at Broadcasting Scotland worked really hard throughout the week, and Scotland at 7 has been on throughout the week this week, so something must have cropped up. Anyway guys, I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great evening, and I'm just going to relax now and chill out. No more ranting from me. Okay, see you tomorrow. Bye bye.